You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Jonathan Gaby hosts a great podcast called Marketing Distilled. He's the master distiller. Jonathan, tell us what these fine folks are going to get out of listening.
On Marketing Distilled, you'll hear from industry experts and me to learn about more marketing things and taking those complex things and distill them down into actionable strategies or tactics.
Amazing. Where can people subscribe?
You can find the show at marketingpodcast.net or search for Marketing Distilled wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard him. Go subscribe.
Entrepreneurs Enigma is a podcast for the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. So the wins and the fails that we all face being entrepreneurs, how we learn from adversity. Every week I talk to a different entrepreneur with a story to tell. I'm Seth Goldstein. Come with me on the journey. This is Entrepreneurs Enigma. Let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Entrepreneurs Enigma podcast. I'm your host, as always, Seth. Today I'm honored, I am excited, I am thrilled, I'm kind of starstruck even. I've been a big fan of the Wonder Years, the band, for a while. I have one of the founding members of the band, an entrepreneur, an artist, coach, a producer, a expat of Philadelphia living in Atlanta. He's very brave. Casey Cavaliere. Hello, my friend. How are you today? That's added you to the stream. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks, Seth. What a lovely introduction, man. I'm going to try and live up to that kind of excitement and enthusiasm. But yes, those are all things that I am guilty of, including my pilgrimage down south to the great metro city of Atlanta.
but Atlanta's fun. I mean, it's no Philly. Let's just be perfectly honest. It's no Philly. Nothing's quite Philly.
Listen,
nothing's quite New York either, but Atlanta is a fun city. It's got a great startup scene too. So
it does. It has an incredible entertainment scene. It's like a new wild film hub, but also just arts in general. Oh yeah, they're like you would be astonished by the amount of things that are going out on like streaming platforms and even like major motion picture houses that are being cut down in Atlanta. It's actually wild.
Atlanta, wow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even just like take the temperature of this, like Tyler Perry, who like a crazy like, entertainment entrepreneur in his own right. And that story, he decided to put his like whole film headquarters and everything in one of the most in one of the poorest neighborhoods of Atlanta. I was just watching an interview with him the other day. It was honestly, he's a really inspiring person. And he was like, I could have put it in like the bougiest, like nicest suburb of Atlanta or whatever. He's like, no, but I wanted to put it in that neighborhood so everybody could grow up. And those kids around there were like, look, a black man did that. He built that, like that. I can do that too. It was, wow, dude, what a powerful interview. But yeah, so there's a ton happening down here in Atlanta. So I wasn't too disappointed to, of all the places that we could have landed. This is not a bad one, but as they say, you can take the guy out of Philly, but they're not taking the Philly out of me.
It's impossible. I think you can take New Yorkers out. You can't do that either. Never mind. I was gonna say you can take New York out of New Yorker. I'm like, that's even harder than Philadelphians, but it's a whole other story.
It follows us. It follows us for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, especially our accent. I mean, they have their own accent down there, but people actually. I was in Italy in college for study abroad, and the guy said, "You're from Philly," and I'm like, "How the heck do you know that?" He's like, "You just sound like you're from Philly."
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Not New York. I've gone to New York a bunch of times, but like Philly.
We joke about it down here. My girlfriend and I and some of my friends, we call it hoagie mouth, the real Delco adjacent. For anybody that it might be confused or not familiar with what that means, it's too hard to unpack, and it's too early for me to attempt any good impressions. Just go watch Mayor of Easttown for about 5 minutes on.
And she was a Brit, and she actually nailed it.
And she just hung outside of Wawa's in South Philly and Central Jersey until it just became part of her,
I'm impressed. I think the Brits do better accents than Americans.
I don't know. She did a pretty good job. She did a pretty compelling job. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know why, but like, I don't see many Americans doing Brits. I see a lot of Brits, a lot of Aussies doing American accents. And then they go on like late night with Jimmy Fallon and they're like, whoa, you're British? Like, what the heck?
You get a lot of that in music too. I see people
Really?
that have like wildly pronounced accents from the UK or so, but then when they sing, you'd never know. And that always fascinated me, you know?
But then there's also ones that like the Struts. Yeah, they sound like they're from England. Aren't they from England? I think they're from England. I think so.
Or Australia. I forget which one, but yeah,
but they have like the Queenish English.
some of them have the heavy pronunciation. Yeah, have that tinge
and it sounds like that. We're gonna take a quick break, hear from our sponsors, and get right back to the show.
As a person with a very deep voice, I'm hired all the time for advertising campaigns. But a deep voice doesn't sell B2B, and advertising on the wrong platform doesn't sell B2B either. That's why if you're a B2B marketer, you should use LinkedIn ads. LinkedIn has the targeting capabilities to help you reach the world's largest professional audience. That's right, over 70 million decision makers all in one place. All the big wigs, then medium wigs, also small wigs who are on the path to becoming big wigs. Okay, that's enough about wigs. LinkedIn ads allows you to focus on getting your B2B message to the right people. So, does that mean you should use ads on LinkedIn instead of hiring me, the man with the deepest voice in the world? Yes, it does. Get started today and see why LinkedIn is the place to be to be. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Neville Hobson and Shell Holtz are the legendary hosts of FIR4 Immediate Release, a great podcast. Shell, tell us what these fine folks will get when they listen.
Well, Jason, Neville and I have been producing FIR since January of 2005. It's the very first PR communications podcast ever. We analyze current news and trends from a communication perspective with a short episode or two each week and a longer, more in-depth show every month.
Awesome. Where can people subscribe?
Well, they can go to firpodcastnetwork.com. They can find the show, of course, at marketingpodcast.net or search for Immediate Release wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard him, folks. Go subscribe.
You know, what I love about the Wonder Years, to get back onto you here, the Wonder Years, I love on your new album, which came out in 2022. That's a lot of twos there.
2020. Yes. Yeah. Well, I was like, whew, what year are we? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's been so hard with the pandemic.
Yeah.
But there's one where you fall into the Delaware, you say Schuylkill, and I'm like, no one's going to get those references unless they're from Philly. And I'm like, I love it. It's like little secret Easter eggs in the song. And I'm like, I don't remember what song that was. It was such a
that's
song.
Paris to Nowhere. Yeah. Our little ode to Philly. Yeah. No, and I love that. And we've always had some jokes about like, I dare you to try and, everybody's like, nothing rhymes with orange. It's just like, well, try Schuylkill,
Yeah, seriously. I mean, you get that in there. I mean, but I love that because the Cars, think about the music, the Cars are from Philly. And they have one song where they say Philly in it. And I'm like, wow, that's cool. But not quite. They say Philadelphia. And that's it. Right. They don't try anything. You guys put Schuylkill, for crying out loud, in a song.
Yeah, we wear it.
That was
brave, proudly. And that's not the first time on that record too. It's like you can find we are very much we're very much a band that talks about our hometown, the suburbs, and then the city that we've all grown up in. Yeah. A lot of the band was from Lansdale. The other half of the band grew up in Bluebell, Ambler.
You're all Montgomery County kids.
All Montco kids. Yeah, for sure. So
it's wild. And to go back to that, 2 decades. You don't see that. You don't see bands sticking around for 2 freaking decades.
Yeah.
Then they're also not like crusty.
Yeah. I mean,
what you do? We're doing it in diapers.
There's probably a little. I mean, you know what? There are. Hey, and again, I'm not trying to call my shot and say that we're going to be doing this in like another 30 years.
I hope you are.
But I still don't know how bands like the Stones get out there and do like.
I don't know how they walk out there.
I just, you know what I mean? Like
thinking
about how much shit hurts on me halfway through a tour, and I'm not even half their age now. It's pretty intense. That's a pretty tall order. But I mean, we've packed a lot in our 2 decades. There's been a lot of growth, a lot of evolution, and it's still the same lineup, which is the further you walk in the entertainment or music business, I think increasingly rare. Yeah,
you don't replace somebody, exactly. And it was kind of funny getting ready for this interview. Like, I've had Guy Kawasaki on the program. I read his memoir. like in 2 days prior, I binged your music for like a week because there's
That's a
2
lot.
decades of freaking there's 2 decades of freaking music.
Yeah.
And it was kind of neat to hear how the evolution of the sound happened.
Yeah.
And how you still go back to the original sound every once in a while on newer albums. Like I like that about bands that aren't like Nickelback. You know, they all sound the same. You know, for better or for worse, I mean, Nickelback has some good songs.
Nickelback did okay. I mean, you know, whatever they figured out something that worked, but yeah, it's not for my casual listening ear, but yeah, for sure.
They're very cookie cutter. You guys aren't cookie cutter, and that's what I like. Because 1 minute you're like headbanging, the next minute it's like a ballad, and I'm like, I love it. It was because it's great for walking because you can do your step, you can do your not elevation steps, your revolution steps. I can't get the word out, but
steps per minute, beats per minute. Yeah.
That kind of stuff, because you can slow down for a little bit, catch your breath on one song.
It's kind of like a hit workout.
It is.
Gives you some.
Yeah. I love it. I was really enjoying it.
That's interesting. And of course, our older records, when we were a little bit younger, a little bit more spry, a little bit angstier, right? Everything that you are in your late teens and early 20s, we packed a lot more notes into those records, a lot more drum fills, a lot more words, right? And I think just tying it back into even the theme of the show and just growing and evolving as a creative, and whether that be, it in the greater sense of being an entrepreneur. And I think I love the idea that creativity doesn't necessarily mean making art. It's kind of solving problems, actually.
It is.
And that's, I think, the true job of an entrepreneur, right? At its core, regardless of what, the product is or what lane or what industry you're in, right? And so for us, there's been a serious evolution, right? An evolution in us as people. You grow a lot into your,
2 decades
throughout your 20s and into your early 30s. A lot of shit happens, man. And so we have always been very self-referential, and in not just the things that we see in the world, but also in our lives, and the life of my singer and our friend groups. And we always try to pack a lot of that in and speak from a very, very personal place. And I think
there's substance to your songs too. Yeah. Like there's stuff. I mean, heck, you get Schuylkill into a song. Let's go back to that. You get talked about the Delaware, talk about the Schuylkill. I mean, it's like, if it's a surfacey song, you're not going to say the word Schuylkill. You're just not going. It's just not going to come up. So that's the last song I just listened to right before the call. So the word Schuylkill in a rock song kind of makes me crack up laughing. I love it. So what is the go ahead. So
I mean, right.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
What's the best thing about being on your own? Because I mean, you're not just a guitarist, a founding member of the Wonder Years. You're a producer. You're an artist coach. And you're a brave soul for living down in Georgia as an Eagles fan. All that good stuff. But what is the best thing about doing your own thing, being an entrepreneur, and not having to answer to the man? Or the woman,
right? Well, I think in some way you're always going to have to answer to somebody, and in a lot of cases it's yourself, right? And it's being honest with yourself. And making sure that you're approaching whatever you do from a place of integrity and authenticity, right? So to me, and I have some interesting thoughts on this in terms of working with a lot of independent artists. We're in a shifting into a new era of the music business where it's highly empowering independent artists and creators, right? Like never before. But a lot comes along with that. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it is easier, because there's a lot more competition, right? So, but I'll actually take something that I was having a conversation earlier this week with someone. And they asked, what's your greatest project or project that you're most proud of? Talking about productions that I've done or albums I've worked on, things like that. And honestly, I'm normally not a person that loves to talk about myself, but I did realize in that moment, I was like, I think my greatest project is me, because I've always realized I've been kind of a constant self-improvement seeker, and always trying to work on myself and whatever that might mean, and that's changed a lot over the last 10 20 years, right? And your awareness of that and what you might need to work on, or what you feel like you can work on, right? Or what you can let go of and don't have to try to hold so tightly, and a lot of ideas about perfection and stuff. So for me, that the fact that I get to work on myself first and foremost, but then everything else kind of flows out from there to really better understand what I enjoy, what I like, what I find fulfillment in, and what I can offer. And that's actually, interestingly enough, been where some of the more, I guess, leadership collaboration roles, like putting on a producer hat or a co-writer hat, or even a podcast host hat, and doing the interview stuff with a show that I have called The Record Process, right? And then that all kind of started flowing into like right before the pandemic, but then the pandemic really supercharged things with some artist mentoring and working one-on-one with a few select bands that had approached me.
And I thought that
had some really compelling stories and, had a really interesting way about thinking about their art, and were leading from a place of authenticity as well, and trying to figure themselves out as an artist, as a band, and what that meant for their music. And I really found out that I was like, man, over 2 decades, we haven't just made a lot of music and put that out. You learn a lot in the process of all of that, about the industry, about the business, about how to construct narratives, how to communicate your ideas effectively and in interesting ways. So that has kind of been the journey for me through all of that. And I kind of, interestingly enough, see how it all starts to tie together into me being honest with myself and being like, you know what? I was never really the coolest guy. Yeah, on paper, sure, I played in a rock band. We've had some success, but I never felt like that, like Motley Crue guy,
It's probably safer that you don't feel that way.
I would completely agree. Right. And, but that's what I realized, where I used to like, read, not necessarily self-help books, but like, like improvement and like self-value based books, philosophies, and while everybody else was kind of reading like fun fiction or biography or whatever. And then eventually I realized I was like, that's actually okay. And that's given me a really interesting and unique tool set that I can use alongside my experience of making a bunch of records and making music, and then also learning how to promote it and put it out. And that in its own way is an extension of creativity for me, outside the studio. Bands that have maybe made the music, but are now figuring out how to create the experiences and brand around it, So
you guys have a brand around it. I mean, it's a good name, and especially for, millennial, Gen Yers. Remember the show, The Wonder Years. It's nice because it harkens back a little bit, which I like.
Well, I'll say it was unintentional, and
was
just
it?
like
That's the best kind.
Yeah, and just like many true lifelong endeavors with other entrepreneurs that I talk to, this was the band that was never supposed to be the serious career project. This was the band after all the other bands we played in high school that we were sure were going to make it. That we had, we're super dedicated out there taking, serious photos on train tracks and brick buildings and warehouses.
When you stop thinking, it happens, and that's a lot of things. It happens in entrepreneurship. Exactly. You just stop taking yourself so freaking seriously.
Yeah, when I have my best ideas, this is why I like get up and go for a walk and either listen to podcasts or just listen to music, or sometimes nothing at all. That like hour is about like just letting my mind wander and not being so rigidly inside a calendar and regimentedly trying to create. That's when this morning I just cracked something wide open for a future season of my podcast that I'm really excited about. Came back, before I even hopped in the shower, I was like, I got to write this down. This
before
is amazing.
It falls out of your head. Exactly.
Right.
Our age, that happens.
And I'm pretty good with that stuff. If I really, need to remember it, I'll take a quick voice note, email it to myself. I have some ways to kind of collect and catalog and come back to those things. I think that's important too, right?
Absolutely.
Documenting and then it's kind of like just get the roughest Cliff Notes draft out. And I used to not be the best at that. I used to try and say, well, nobody can hear it and I'm not going to put it down until I have a full song flushed out. And that's kind of silly,
Exactly. So on the flip side, what keeps you up at night? Like being an entrepreneur for, and a musician for 2 decades, for crying out loud. I mean, what's the scary thing about being an entrepreneur and independent?
Well, honestly, and I think we've always had this baked into us and our DNA as a band, specifically with Wonder Years. we've never taken something for granted and the longevity of our career for granted. And still to this day, you can show us on paper, hey, 3,000 people are going to show up to see you guys tonight. And there's still a small, and now this part has like diminished, very, very, very steadily over the years, but there's still a part of us. It's like, but like, I feel like there's still a chance that they might just like 200 and like 2,098 of them might decide, I don't really care. I'm not gonna go after all, and then we're gonna walk out. And yes, and that's a great word for it. And I think that's kind of exactly what I realized that it was, but it was always out of our, it was born out of our insecurities.
Imposter syndrome.
And and still trying to like, are what we're putting out there, worthy of whatever praise or acclaim it's getting. And eventually I realized that's less relevant, right? It's like, and we're realizing, hey, have we put something out that's been useful and valuable for other people? And at a certain point, once the record's out, it's theirs and they can do with it what they wish, and it becomes part of their story, and it's much less part of ours, in an interesting way. And I love that. So that's probably the thing that used to keep me up a lot more at night, was being like, is this all going to drop out? Are we going to just like, is this kind of steady, slow growth going to just plateau and then sink and drop off a cliff? And then we, got to go back and find a day job thing. And, there's still a part of me that thinks like, that could just happen now. We just went through a pandemic, right? That really shook some things up. We were very lucky that we had built a community around our music that cared enough for us that they made sure they did their best to support us through the pandemic as a band, through streams and other avenues.
It must have been wild for you guys. Yeah. I know a lot of bands. I know like churches. Churches with the V, which drives me to the wall. Being a former journalist, they put a V with that for
yes,
to virtues. They did it for SEO purposes, which I can appreciate. So
totally,
so they can be found. But they did on something on YouTube where they showed how everyone was in their own space, and they still recorded and had fun. I guess you guys did similar thing. I mean, you're in Atlanta. I'm sure some of you guys are in Philadelphia. I'm sure. It's kind of a commute.
This was before I moved, actually, that we, so I moved like 20,
can't remember,
21. I had 21. Yeah. And so we had a chance to try our hand at some of those kind of like quarantine studio live streams. And I think what was interesting, and I mentioned this to someone the other day, looking back, is I think more so than anything else, more so than like the quality or it being like wildly exciting or interesting, I think it was more important for us to show the people that had really supported us over the years, hey, this is weird for us too. We're all kind of we're all in this together moment. And so people showed up, sure. Hopefully, it didn't sound too bad and they enjoyed hearing the songs, but it was also just a slight diversion, which at that time was really valuable, I think, for a lot of people. So, so we did our part. We said, hey, we can do our best to try and make the best out of this right now, and realize that even just showing up is
that was so
a really big part of it. So
even if like mistakes happen during the stream, like it was like, who cares? It was like, they're showing up, they're doing their thing, they're having fun trying to figure it out. A lot of times there's lots of giggles like on streams. They're like, whoa, what just happened there?
I think
people's husbands would walk by in their underwear, like not running, the camera picks it up, like weird stuff. I mean, it was definitely a weird time.
And I think it was a moment where a lot of music fans and listeners that had already developed their own kind of relationship with a band's music and who they are, they got to see an extra side of that band's humanity in a certain way that kind of, in some instances even further galvanized their respect and appreciation for what the band did, and realized like, oh, it's not all unicorns and rainbows if you're in a successful band. You still have to deal with the uncertainty of a pandemic and whether or not your grandparents may get COVID right now, and trying to go out and balance doing your job, which forces you to play in a space with at least a certain number of other people, against trying to keep your family safe and navigating all the other challenges, right? So I think that was an important thing, maybe just as much, if not more so, than the music or how great the stream sounded. It was kind of showing up. And I think if I'm going to do my best here to tie it all back into the focal point of your show, the idea of being an entrepreneur is problem solving, like I said, and ultimately, a lot of times I'm a big proponent and appreciator of Stoic philosophies and how they can play into, sometimes seemingly in an oxymoronic way, very empathetic, creative domains. And in this case, it was a very much the obstacle is the way, right? And it forced people to say, I'm either going to just give up and say, great, the world presented this thing, I can't be a band the way I once was. Okay. I guess that's over. Or steering into it and saying, what does this moment present us with? And in that way, it was a moment to really pull back the veil, pull back the curtain and say, hey, we're here, just like kind of like fourth wall break in a big way, and we've always been hard on our sleeves and been very transparent with our fans. I think that's important, especially for us as people. And we've known how much we've appreciated when other bands and artists, and even businesses and brands can do that same thing and do it honestly. And so for us, this was like, and I saw this with a lot of other bands too, where it was like, it brought out a side of them where you're like, holy cow, like this person just kind of like broke down in the middle of this song because they're overwhelmed with just like the whole like weirdness of it. So, and I think that was, I think where we are going, especially as entrepreneurs and just moving forward in the internet age, I think that's more and more increasingly important to do in order to set yourself apart, not just to sell something, but to let people know what about you is very different and is very real, as opposed to trying to curate the perfect facade.
Exactly. Yeah. So what is the most important thing to carry with you all the time?
Well,
I like this question.
I'm going to kind of flip this one on my head because a lot of people might say like phone or like a notebook or a voice recorder. Those are all good things, but I am going to say empathy,
good one.
And take it in that lane, because I think if you can go into any experience and at least have a bit of a pause and a moment to try and understand where somebody else in whatever interaction is coming from or was coming from in the past when they created something, or might be, where they might be going and why, and understanding, again, back to that humanity. I think if you can carry that with you, even just a little bit of it, and it's not easy every day, right? It can very quickly be kind of like, tamped down or kind of swatted around by life and how that, everything interacts with each other. But to me, that is a thing where every time I am able to, even for a moment, put myself in somebody else's shoes, it always seems to open the most interesting doors, both for myself, for that other person. And I think that's really where the good stuff ends up being. It doesn't mean you have to love and praise every person that you get in front of, but if you can at least take just a second and do the listening portion of stuff before you start doing the rabid disagreement, you can still do the disagreement part, but at least try to ask, well, why do you think that? What has brought you to that belief stance or that need for something or whatever it is in that moment? And I'm not saying have a genuine conversation that lasts like, 90 minutes with every person you hold the door for. Right?
Yeah, that'd be tiring.
But an example down here, drivers are wild in the South. I know they're also wild in New York in a very different way.
Too.
Right?
With
Philly, right. Everybody feels like drivers in their city are the worst drivers. That much has become apparent to me traveling all around the world.
Italy is the worst. Italy is the worst.
I mean, and I can understand those streets are treacherous. So it's just a powder keg over there. But I will say, like, I've never seen like super duty oversized pickup trucks drive more recklessly and fast for seemingly no good reason than I have down here on some of these highway systems. And so that's interesting. But I say this to be like, your first inclination is like, like doing the internal swearing dialogue and whatever, or even just whatever it be like, something adjacent to road rage, or someone has a bad day, you get in a bad interaction at the coffee shop, whatever. It's like, understand, it's like, hey, I know I'm a monster. Maybe instead of just being like, wow, that person is a real creep, and just feel nothing but negative. It's like, you never know what that person's morning looked like. You never know what that person's going through. And that doesn't necessarily give them a license to do that. But like, maybe the difference between them completely breaking down that day and tossing in the towel with whatever they're grappling with, and them being able to last one more day to go find the help they need or solve the problem that's really grinding them down, might just be you having just an extra bit of patience and understanding, hey, I don't know what's going on. If maybe what the fates that be allowed you to show up in that moment with a little extra bandwidth when that person needed some of that. And maybe it's that simple. Maybe it's not. That's for everybody to decide. But that is something that I carry with me, or that I try my best to carry with me, I'll say, even when it can be difficult. Yeah.
So Casey, where is your watering hole online? Where can people find? Well, obviously Spotify. Go look up, or go to, buy their merchandise on their website, all that good stuff. See them in concert, because aren't you going on tour soon?
Well, we always are. There's always things in the plans. We just announced a festival in Philly that for September that sold out pretty quickly, so that's exciting. And as far as like, the wonderyearsband.com is where all that good stuff is. And as far as me personally and everything else I'm doing, whether it be the podcast or working with other artists or producing music, that can all be found under the CaseyCavaliere.com banner. And there's an E on the end of Cavaliere, which is sometimes confusing, but it is silent. And I'm not sure where it came from either. But so just look out for that.
French or something like that. They like to add letters.
We're heavily Italian, so it might have something to do with that.
Italian.
But I have no idea. I really don't.
Romance languages, they add letters.
Yes, and unfortunately, my grandparents left us before I could really get the full story
Why do
on
we
it.
Have that
But I like it now, and it's become a part of me. So that would just be the only thing. But and then on Instagram, if anybody's there, that's just at @case_rock. And check out the pod. I mean, we're on, this comes out in podcast form. People are probably listening to it there. Within that app, if you search The Record Process, that's a show that I do where we do like deep dive interviews on, the who, what, where, when, how, and why behind some really amazing records and how they get made. We have artists talk about it. We have producers. We have the songwriter. A different lens and a different role is kind of highlighted with each album. And so it's interesting. So I have a lot of fun.
You'll put all that in the show notes.
Yeah, it's
You'll
a
have
nice
to send me all those links. I get them in there.
We'll get it there. But if anybody's curious, that's where you feel free to reach out if anybody has any questions pertaining to any of those.
Yeah, awesome. And we'll see everyone next time. That was a great show. If you're enjoying Entrepreneurs Enigma, please review us in the podcast directory of your choice. Every review helps other podcast listeners find our show. If you're looking for other podcasts in the marketing space, look no further than the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcasts.net. Goldstein Media hopes you have enjoyed this episode. This podcast is one of the many great shows on the MPN Marketing Podcast Network.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but there are other great shows on MPN to help your business too. I'm Jason Falls. I host The Rise, the community commerce marketing show. There we explore an exciting new category of marketing strategy and automation focused on driving brand growth through your own community. So you start with your own customers, employees, followers, and partners and empower them to recommend and refer your brand. You can subscribe to The Rise, the community commerce marketing show at marketingpodcasts.net or by searching for The Rise, the community commerce marketing show, wherever you get your podcasts. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.